Welcome to the Agentic Mesh podcast. Eric, it's great to see you again this week.
Great to be here, John. How you doing?
I love it, and I love our new dark blue background. It's a big change. Your head looks fantastic. So what are we talking about today? We're coming back to more agentic process automation, but what do we tell them what we're going to cover?
Sure. There's a lot of stuff we've talked about with respect to agentic process automation. The challenge that we want to address today is how do we actually evaluate if an agent is doing what it's supposed to? So, if we're going to have thousands of agents and they're going to be executed in a form factor, we think it will be processes. There'll be full participants in processes like today we have human participants in these processes. There is clearly an evaluation framework, how people are doing their work. Is there something we can learn about that we can apply to agents to figure out how we can evaluate if an agent's doing its job properly?
Okay, good. And for those of you who might be listening to us for the first time, we've been covering how we're thinking about agentic process automation. And there's lots of previous episodes that you can go back to and look at specific topics we've covered. And, I'll say this almost every episode. I think every week something fascinating and new happens in our industry. And I love that we're laying down our point of view every week so that we can come back to it and evolve it over time as the technology improves. So let's talk about our evaluation framework. How do we think about evaluating agents? And I'll let you get the ball rolling.
Well, hopefully I can simplify this a fair amount. So we think there's two dimensions that we ought to be looking at. The first one is autonomy. Is the agent doing work on its own, or is it guided by a person? And then there's criticality. Is the agent doing, for lack of a better word, important work that has
Right.
lots of consequences, or stuff that doesn't? Now, these things are what we think are pretty orthogonal dimensions. And naturally, with those two dimensions, you can align them to a quadrant, John. So we think the reason we want to do that, though, is crucial, is not eh, based on the dimensions that we mentioned, not every agent should be evaluated in the same way. There are material differences between what they do and how they do it and how important the work is that we think there's a reason to differentiate them. That's why we think there's a framework that needs to be applied.
Yeah, and for folks that have been listening to us know that we have a great deal of consulting background, and using a classic Boston Square 2 by 2 matrix is a great way to think about, to what extent do I need to care about evaluation? And I love these two dimensions because it keeps it really simple. There's a lot of work we do that we can ask an agent to do that doesn't really matter if it's accurate or not. Like asking it to teach you about a topic that's fascinating to you in your personal life. Well, what if it gets it wrong? Nobody cares. So the criticality of a simple question like why did the why did the Roman Empire fall, which is a hilariously male centric question. I don't think many women listeners would care, but I've been told a lot of men do. But the accuracy and the impact that asking the question of an AI and getting an answer back that might be wrong, it just doesn't have a material impact. And so that's the way to think about our 2 by 2. How critical is that, or how much value is associated with it? That's the bottom axis. And then the other one, the autonomy axis, is like you said, how much of this is intended to be automated? Is this just a quick response, like something I would ask a chatbot? And so I think I've defined the least critical and least autonomous example in our Boston Square. It's by the origin of the 2 by 2 matrix. And it's, just chat bot questions that aren't meant to be meaningful. One of the things, and you're allowed to cut me off. 'Cause
No, no, you're on a roll. You go right ahead.
okay. Because one of the things you hear a lot of people understand when they start using AI chatbots is you start to see it at work, right? Somebody says, "Hey, can you figure this out for me?" And then they go and instead of Googling it, they open AI it or they, they go to their favorite chatbot and get the answer and they send it back. And so what a lot of people are starting to feel is this overload because for these low impact, low criticality decisions, which they use chatbots for or Googling it, they're applying that same thinking or mental model to business decisions, which is completely inappropriate. My sister, when used to complain to me that this is not the librarian sister, the privacy advocate, was saying that people are just using chatbots to generate copious amounts of text, and they're treating it as first class output when if it's really important, like you're doing a research study, to assume the chatbot's going to give you high quality research is wrong. There are chatbots that focus on research, but unless you understand the importance and criticality of it, you can't use the same value system to assess how you're doing more important work. So I think I made a couple of points there, but I just think that we can't apply the same loose discipline of, oh yeah, just Google it or chatbot it, because that's just not how to think about it.
Absolutely. So let's kind of bring this to life. So I want to go through and give you a very trivial example. I know I do this
Yeah.
is I use chatbots to find recipes.
Okay.
That's the perfect example of low autonomy because I'm helping it or I'm asking it, and low criticality. Whether my recipe is good or not only impacts me, maybe my wife, and whether the thing tastes good or not. Definition, it's in the bottom left-hand quadrant, low autonomy, low criticality. But let's bring this to life in an industry perspective, a business perspective. Let's use
Yeah.
something that maybe is fairly easy to understand, the medical profession. So if I extend my chatbot analogy, maybe I'm using a chatbot to say, why have I got a headache or something like that? I'm asking it questions about that are in the medical domain, but they're about me and they're not necessarily that critical. Okay. That's not to say you can't ask important questions to a chatbot, but using the example, that puts me in the bottom left hand quadrant. Again, low autonomy, low criticality. But let's go to the far other extreme.
Right.
Uh, so if I have something that's high autonomy and high criticality, maybe I have an agent that is doing medical diagnostics live. Okay. And this may be something that isn't done today, but let's project a little bit out into the future. This is where an agent may be looking at X-rays or looking at the output of a medical exam, and then making recommendations, maybe offering medicines, maybe offering very detailed diagnostics that may require a lot of further investigation or investment. So that's the far end of the continuum. That's the top right. And that's the high autonomy and a high criticality. If we look at, let's take the bookends here. What we have is something that an example of low criticality, high autonomy, maybe a medical administrator. This is where you have to fill the paperwork out, maybe for your insurance or whatever the case may be. You want that process to be, first off, super efficient. But if there's a few mistakes, yeah, maybe annoying, but the criticality is not going to affect your life in any meaningful way necessarily. But this is handling paperwork and stuff is perfect for an agent, and that's one of those things where you really would like to have an agent that if they can do it well, they can do it fast. You may want them to handle the administrative side of the coin. Now, if I look at the other side, high criticality, but
Yeah.
low autonomy, maybe what I have is a doctor who has a medical assistant, an agent. And that's obviously the autonomy is minimal because the doctor is there guiding the process. But the criticality and the outcomes that the agent provides would be very, very, yes, they're guided by the doctor, but could be very, very important to a person's health. So hopefully that brings that to life, John. I don't know, you probably have a perspective on this also.
No, I like it, and I know we're gonna show a graphic at some point, and I think it just makes sense, right? Administrative work that you would like to automate that is low criticality, like filling out forms at the doctor's office. Who doesn't love or hate that? That administrative thing is low criticality because it's typically a lot of work and you can review it quickly and it doesn't influence the diagnostic process, right? The use of the brilliance of the doctor and what they've studied. It's really just the administrative part. And so that makes a lot of sense to me. Whereas this idea that you're providing a high value thinking partner for an existing doctor who knows the difference between what they're interpreting. And so it's high criticality because it's about healthcare and it's obviously high criticality, but it has manual oversight because the doctor's using it. And so this is a great way to think about the four quadrants and a way to keep it simple and to not treat everything with the same degree of focus. So that's great. We've explained it, we've given an example. How do we think about this when we're building agentic systems? Where do you want to take the conversation next? Do you want to?
Yeah, well, we said this is an evaluation framework, so let's offer a little bit of thought on
Okay.
what are the characteristics that we may evaluate in each. Now, the first thing we said off the get go is we said the quadrants may define different criteria, or at least different weighting of the criteria when we actually evaluate an agent. Again, whether it's a chatbot, addressing why do I have a headache, has different criteria than the medical diagnostician that will offer real medical advice that gets implemented. The way that we look at the agent and evaluate it, like we said, it's not one size fits all. So what I'd like to do, John, is I want to explore, I want to advocate first off, and then explore the fact that depending on where the agent is in that quadrant, the criteria or minimally the weighting will actually be quite different. So that's probably where we want to start. So go ahead.
So yeah, I love it. Okay, now I want to take an example, and we can keep with the medical one, but I'm just not a medical practitioner, right? So I'm thinking, and then I'm going to spring this on you in real time. What if we use the concept of a coding agent? Because I think it's very appropriate. And here's why I think that. So everybody asks, hey, Claude Code and OpenAI's Codex. I mean, and Gemini's work, the coding agents are incredibly powerful today. Here we are in the beginning of March, and they're mind blowing what we could do that we couldn't do 3 months ago. So, but there's still there's a class of problems that you wouldn't allow the coding agent to take on. And I think those are the ones where you're trying to automate. You're trying to do highly autonomous code generation across an entire body of work without having architectural patterns. I guess what I'm trying to express is that in the automated coding space, I still think that high autonomy, high criticality, like building your entire software product, just saying, go do it, is still, we're still not there yet. And so the point I wanted to make is that projects or problems that you're classifying in this way, they can be coding problems as well as how you think about other forms of agent processing. And so I just throw that out there because I know we've been talking a lot about coding agents, and one of the biggest problems is you can automate it a lot, but there's still a bunch of things you can't automate. And
Yeah.
uh,
No, I think it's actually a very good example. So there's a bunch of different ways we can tackle this, but let's just use the coding domain first
mhm,
off. Then I think what we can do is extend it a little bit.
sure,
So when I use Claude Code. I actually play with Codex also, both formidable agents.
Yeah.
As you said, 3 months ago, I couldn't do the things I'm doing today. These things are incredible. They can build really, really complex projects. But here's the thing, they're still personal tools. So there's a question of scale. But let's put that aside.
Yeah.
When I look at an agent, there's a few things that I want to be able to assess it on. Obviously, accuracy, however I
Yeah.
measure that. Okay. Different projects have different maybe test cases, different outcomes you're trying to achieve. So I'm looking for accuracy. I'm looking for efficiency. Doesn't help me if I want an answer in 5 minutes and my coding agent's going for 5 hours.
Right.
So there's a little bit of expectation matching, I suppose, but efficiency is important. And that's more perhaps time efficiency. We want to have token efficiency.
Yes.
One of the wonderful things, I think the recent metrics I saw is if you're using a chatbot using X tokens, we'll say, if you're using these coding agents, you're using 100X tokens.
Oh,
And as
yeah.
we all know, tokens cost money.
Yeah.
So I want to have smart use of tokens. I may want to have breadth of tool use.
Yeah.
If my coding agent needs to, I'll give you a trivial example. All coding agents can do this now, but let's say I needed a coding agent that needed access to the internet, but it couldn't. Then that, for effective purposes, my agent can't do its job. So obviously, all agents have access to the internet, but there may be some very specific industry domain tools that would be mandatory for an agent. So where I'm going with it is these are characteristics that I think could apply across the board for agents, but depending on what they build, okay, they may be different weighted. So let's assume those characteristics are the same. If I were in the top right quadrant, the medical diagnostician, maybe I would weight accuracy
Oh,
as
yeah.
has to be 10 out of 10. And I may not worry about token efficiency, because you know what? Healthcare is you spend what you need to get good healthcare. So depending on where you are in that quadrant, you're going to have, let's just say, different weighting. There's probably going to be different criteria too. But if I'm in the bottom left hand, and I'm building I'm building a recipe application or something like that, or I'm building an app to help me, diagnose really simple problems. What ends up happening there is the characteristics may be the same, but you know what? Maybe accuracy is not the biggest deal.
Right.
But you know what? It's my personal dollars. Maybe token efficiency is important.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is you should almost visualize a radar chart with the criteria, and then is it a 0 to 10 or something like that on that scale, to actually look at what is important at a glance for your agent. Our proposition is that depending on where you are in that quadrant, they're going to be different.
Right. 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 And I think the criteria that a lot of people are talking about now is that token efficiency, or how many tokens does it take to do that? And that's an obvious critical concern, because we know that with more tokens, you can do more analysis and do more research and second guessing and checking things. And so I think that's a big factor. And it reminds me of that announcement of the pricing strategy for code reviews that just came out this week. And it's very expensive to do a code review, but they've added all kinds of capabilities to the code review. So if it's extremely important that your coding agent has a very deep code review, maybe it's worth spending those extra dollars to improve the quality of it, or to verify some dimension of that solution that is
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, I think if you were to ask a person who deals with the ethics of the agents, I think there would be a point where if you have high autonomy, high criticality, you may actually want to have a human in the loop that actually approves of the efficacy of an agent. I think there is still there's still going to be for a long time situations where you will want to have humans in the loop. Like I said, especially for highly autonomous and high criticality applications. The rest of the stuff, I think, largely, we should probably talk a little bit of how we may do this, but a lot of this stuff, as you highlighted, can perhaps be automated with some of the agents checking on each other. In fact, I was listening to it was the Moonshot podcast, and they had I think the fellow's name was Alex Fell, I think. And what he is he's an expert in applying Claw, Open Claw. And what
Yeah.
he's done is he's actually created a full set of agents, all running on Mac Minis and all this kind of stuff. And depending on what they're doing, the question that he posed is, or somebody posed on the podcast, is how do you know if the agent is actually doing what it's supposed to? What is the way that you actually verify? Well, what he did, he says, I have an agent that constantly looks at what the other agents are doing and puts them back on track. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, but the one thing I do know is if we try and apply regular type, pie test or unit test type stuff, we may be disappointed. There's a role for that, absolutely, but we may be disappointed. The equality attribute or a test operator, assert that this equals this, may not apply when, if I ask this, provide the LLM with the same request, I get a slightly different answer every time. Where's your head at on that? I know you have a lot of strong ideas in that regard, but what type of tools could we use to actually implement this evaluation scheme, John?
Okay. Well, I'm glad you asked. Dude. And I think uh, the the generic term is judging agents, right? And it's a generic term that's used for a lot of things, right? But in the context of or pun intended, but in the context of evaluating agents, a judge is sort of the way we've been talking about it for the past couple of years, right? When we said, well, how do we know if it's right? Well, we would have another agent, maybe from a different model provider, review the answer and say, well, is that right? And there's a lot more to it than that about how judging agents could be used. And I think I mentioned it on one of these podcasts, but there are a number of great vendors out there and software providers that work in financial services. And I think we're going to have her on. If I could remember, I think wayfound.ai, and have her tell us how she thinks about judging agents. And I've heard Snowflake or the Carnegie Mellon professor Anupam Data, who has created, I think it was True Era that got acquired by Snowflake. He has a set of judging agents that measure whether the agents are following their goals. That's the G. Are they following the plan? That's the P, or the actions. So he's created this acronym GPA. And that's how he creates, 9 different judging agents to evaluate how other agents are performing. So I probably did a sloppy job of explaining it, but judging agents are a common theme for how do you evaluate other agents, right? And so I think there's a lot of conversations going into that. And I think the question that is on everyone's mind is that enough? And is that sufficient? Well, same sort of question, but is that enough to trust the output of an agent? And how do you know? And so I think that conversation about agent evaluation, it's not the primary purpose of today's topic, but I think this will be very important. And I think looking at what some of the vendors are doing and how they're thinking about it will be really important. The other term that I had heard was, and I love it. They're taking the term guardian angel and they're calling it a guardian agent, which is similar. What if there was a judging agent whose sole purpose was to keep things in the guardrails? And so there's a body of work, and I'm sure it's copyright by somebody that talks about those forms of judging agents as well. Um,
Hmm. Well, one of the things that I think is absolutely first off, I think you're exactly right. I think there's a bunch of techniques by different names, perhaps, but absolutely spot on. The one thing that strikes me, John, that is common across all this is while we have this agent framework, inside each framework, there's a rubric. This rubric says these are the criteria that's important. This is the relative weighting for this in your quadrant. And then you can actually have the measurement schemes, whether it's a judge agent, a guardian agent, or some other mechanism to actually say, well, if this is the scale and this is how important it is, this is where the agent actually fits on that scale in terms of performance. This reminds me, by the way, of hate to say it, but how we used to do performance reviews back in the day with employees when I was an
Oy
executive.
vey.
So you know what goes around comes around. Maybe fortunately, maybe unfortunately, I'm not sure. But the notion of a rubric and formalizing what you as an organization think is important, and then weighting it accordingly. I'm hoping that we've provided at least a pathway to getting to that point, John.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. If we were to come back to that original theme of how do you think about evaluation? One, it's understanding the criticality and the autonomy. The other is to think about the criteria or a rubric, as you say, and anybody who's done employee evaluation for a long time, we both had manager and senior manager executive roles. There's so many of them. And just like people, if we're going to be delegating authority to agents to do things that, an administrative task that we used to have somebody do, then we're going to have to apply that same discipline around an evaluation framework and a rubric for evaluating what we expect these agents to do. And because there could be millions of them, seeing that and evaluating that is gonna be something that we're gonna probably need agents to help us with, right? And so,
Absolutely, absolutely.
it's agents all the way down if we
Yeah, and
allow it to be.
yeah. Now, you mentioned a word that I want to elevate again, and that's
Okay,
that word trust. And here's
right.
why: is in previous podcasts we talked about a trust framework and started with identity and governance at the top. Not going to drain it, but there's one in the middle there. It's like explainability and reliability. Now, I'm not going to explore the definitions again, but here's what I would say is that the evaluation of the agent fits somewhere in that evaluate in that reliability explainability layer in our framework. So this actually the reason we do this is not just to manage the performance of an agent, it's also to measure the trust that we have in that agent and to continuously improve that independent of where you are in the quadrant. Being able to trust agents is foundation. One of the foundations it's built upon is the ability to actually evaluate whether it's doing its job.
Yes. Yeah, and we could all think of situations where we don't hold people accountable, for getting everything right. In the same way, there will be a lot of processes that don't need to be perfect to be improved through automation in certain circumstances. So I think bringing that mindset to it is very key.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I don't know if I have terribly much more to add, John. I think any final words, any last comments or something, or did we miss something?
We covered what we wanted to today. And I think it's important. I really think that what I'm seeing a lot of is demonstrations of capability and teaching by showing. And we were talking about this earlier today. I think we're getting to a point where in this podcast, we're not going to try to be tutorials, but I think we're going to get to the point where we're going to say, hey, Claude Code, hey, why don't you throw together the evaluation framework and let's throw it up there on the site so that people can see what we're doing. And I would put that out as a challenge. And if anybody wants something like that, please add to the comments and let us know that it would be valuable to see examples of some of the things we're talking about. But that's for another time. Good talk.
I think that's a wrap, my friend.
Take care. See you next time.
Take care, buddy.